gotta tell somebody.
This is the best thing I've ever seen.
Let's talk about that.
You need this. Listen to this.
Memorable and exciting.
Well, then be less boring.
I'm going to tell everyone. Wait here.
Mighty remarkable, Big Daddy. Remarkable?
Welcome to Remarkable, a podcast for B2B marketers that deconstructs the most iconic moments in film, television, pop culture, and advertising for a single purpose: to give you, the B2B marketer, the same storytelling techniques that the pros use. In each episode, you will learn techniques from Hollywood, Pixar, Marvel, and beyond, from Spielberg's hands to yours, bringing remarkable content ideas to you every single week. I'm Ian Faison, CEO of Caspian Studios. This is Remarkable. This week, we're talking about marketing lessons from F1 sponsorships. With the help of our special guest, marketing consultant for action sports and financial services companies, Ondar Tarlow. Ondar, how are you?
I'm great, Ian. Super excited to be here. And we're talking about one of my favorite subjects, F1.
Yeah, what was your first encounter with F1?
That's a wonderful question. So I've been an avid, sometimes called a rabid fan of Formula One since 2004.
Wow.
I watched it, but yeah, it's been a while. So I know I look younger than that, of course, but it's been a while. So
yeah. Were you a fan in the crib?
Exactly. So always interested in racing, IndyCar, stock car racing, but F1 has always been like the big deal for me. And I think it was just, I was always interested in travel, and you would see F1 on the TV, and it was really limited in the US, but you would see like Monaco, right? Or you would see Japan, or you would see England, and you would just think, oh my gosh, what would it be like to be at that race, to experience everything that was going on? And so that's what really hooked me. And then I decided to go to a first race with a buddy of mine, and we decided to go to Montreal. And Montreal, if you've been, is an amazing race. It's an amazing city. It really kind of takes the best of all worlds, Canada, US, France, it kind of combines them into one city. And then you've got a race. And the race itself is on an island in the bay. And there's two things on that island. There is a casino and there's a racetrack. So when you think about F1, it really doesn't get any better than that. And the entire city is just into this race. So for 4 days, it's just absolute pandemonium as far as Formula One is concerned. So much so that there's brands that literally take over streets within downtown Montreal. So there'll be the Red Bull Street, or there'll be the Ferrari Street, and so forth. So it's pretty incredible. So that's how I got it.
Amazing. And we're going to dig real into F1 here. But you've also been a multi-time CMO of financial services companies. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I've been working in financial services for a couple of decades, actually, and really got my start in kind of the mortgage and banking industry, and then leveraged that working with some really wonderful teams to ascend and become a chief marketing officer and overseeing marketing for really some great brands, and really working in some great areas like we're talking about today, brand integration and sponsorships. And so throughout my career, I've always looked at it from a standpoint of that if I'm going to be in marketing, I'm working in financial services, or now I'm in financial services or motorsports, that it's got to be something that's exciting. And as your audience now, as any good marketer knows, you cannot stay stagnant with marketing. You have to be dedicated to the craft. You have to be looking to learn all the time, because marketing is changing so quickly. And even now, obviously, with generative AI, it is moving even quicker. And so what I've been able to do in my career is be able to generate and create great teams that are really focused on the entire funnel. So everything from brand awareness all the way through to conversion, and look at things really in a life cycle, as opposed to pinpointing one specific item and focusing on it. We really look at everything based on what the business challenge is. What are we looking to accomplish first, starting off with what the business strategy is, and then how does marketing roll into that? How does marketing support that strategy and execute for the company to be able to generate growth.
Amazing. So why the heck did you pick F1 sponsorships to talk about today?
Well, we are, coming up on Memorial Day in 2025, depending upon when your viewers are listening to this. So we have Monaco this weekend, which is kind of like the granddaddy of them all as far as Formula One races. And also because it's just such an exciting time for Formula One. It is amazing as far as the US market is concerned, because now, since the addition of the Miami as well as the Las Vegas race, the Las Vegas race has been running now for 2 years. There's actually 3 races in the US, which is unbelievable, because 20 years ago, there was 1 race and there was, I think, 2 or 3 races in all of North America. Now you have 5 races in North America. Of course, you've got Montreal, the 3 races we just mentioned in the US, and you also have Mexico City. And based on really just the unbelievable increase in excitement and viewership and fandom as far as Formula One, in the last few years, so many brands have jumped on board. The latest one, probably the largest in the last few years, Louis Vuitton, taking over a level that had only been occupied by the likes of Rolex and other high-scale brands as far as Formula One was concerned. So it's an exciting time. There's a massive amount of money being spent globally to be a part of F1. And so I think it's a great topic to discuss and be able to share some insights and talk about some of the ways that you can utilize these things from a marketing perspective, and also some of the things that you need to be aware of when you're looking at doing brand integrations.
Amazing. Meredith, what the heck are F1 sponsorships?
So I want to start today with some statistics. This year, Formula One is projected to reach a total sponsorship spend of $2.9 billion, which is massive. The average deal right now is around $37 million annually. And now tech and financial service brands are both major investors in F1, each making up about 20% of new sponsorship deals this year. Many are cryptocurrency companies. So this year, Gate.io joined Red Bull and Coinbase joined Aston Martin. And that has changed over time, which we'll talk about, but it continues to evolve. Adam Lewis, who's an analyst at Ampere Analysis, said, F1 teams have capitalized on the series' growing attention in recent seasons, adopting varied sponsorship strategies. McLaren has pursued a high-volume approach, securing numerous sponsorships across several product categories, while Red Bull has focused on fewer deals with wide-ranging activity. So there are definitely different strategies at play here. But F1 sponsorships really started in the 1960s. And then I was like, how long has F1 really been around? And it's been around since 1950.
As they thunder away to a perfect start. Jumping into an early lead is Juan Fangio, number 1, the former bus driver from the Argentine, and today the most successful racing motorist on the continent.
At the time, sponsors were often cigarette or tobacco companies, which I thought was interesting. The first was in 1968, when Imperial Tobacco's Gold Leaf brand sponsored the Lotus team.
Mild, aromatic, fragrant, cool. That's Imperial Crown pipe tobacco.
So the driver, Graham Hill, had his Lotus 49B, which had been painted red, gold, and white. And this was like a new term that I was hearing is livery. So the livery is like the painting or the decals and things on the exterior of the car, which I'm sure, Ondar, you already knew. But that deal with Lotus and Imperial Tobacco was around £85,000 a year. And it covered both Formula 1 and 2, which I didn't know there was a Formula 2, as well as the Tasman Series, which was a series of races in Australia and New Zealand, which I think ended in 1975. And so that same year, actually, the first privateer team that was sponsored was Team Gunston. Gunston was a cigarette brand, and they painted their livery sort of this golden orange, cream, and brown. So it feels very like retro colors.
In the color of cigarettes.
In the color of
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yep, the color of cigarettes. And I was like, what were the cars painted before that? And they were in the colors of their country's flag. The most expensive sponsorship deal ever in F1 history is Oracle's deal with Red Bull Racing.
It's not just about having a sticker on the car. It's about the technology that it puts into the car as well. And so therefore, a partnership like the one we have with Oracle, the technology that opens up to us is so exciting.
Which is for 5 seasons, and it's $100 million. That was announced in 2022, and that's now been matched by HP, who made a $100 million deal with Ferrari. So it's definitely booming, but I'm wondering, Ondar, how you're thinking about, like, because this was a question for me, is like, how are these sponsors sort of proving ROI on these sponsorships? What are some things that they could be looking into?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, Meredith, thanks for all those facts. There's definitely some of those that you were able to pull that were even new to me. But also, good point, Ian. It seemed like when there was tobacco in Formula One, which of course is no longer in Formula One, it's not allowed to be. It's against the Formula One rules, and it has been for a number of years for obvious reasons. They kind of did with the livery, right? So the little exterior design of the car, try to make it look like a pack of cigarettes. Marlboro did that really well with Ferrari for a time. And then just another one fun fact, which is something that I only learned probably in the past couple of years, is that with Ferrari, because you were talking about how the liveries and how the colors change depending upon the country. What's interesting to know is when you think about Ferrari, you also think about race cars and you think about the passenger cars, you always think about Ferrari red, right? What's interesting to know is that Enzo Ferrari, obviously the creator of Ferrari, his favorite color was actually yellow. But because the colors of the cars were based on the countries where they were originated, the color for Italy was red. And that's kind of where this whole red for Ferrari came about.
Crazy.
Because it was on their racing cars. But his actual favorite color was yellow, which is a little fun fact to the side. But to your original question, Meredith, with respect to kind of the ROI, which is always like the birdie question in marketing, first and foremost, I'm going to say that not everything you do in marketing is going to have a 100% ROI in terms of being able to figure out that ROI. So a lot of the bigger brands that I see in the mix and have been in the mix for a while, Rolex, Heineken, and others, like even Google as an example with McLaren, and now that you see Louis Vuitton in the mix, a lot of it is just a full top of funnel brand play. And I also think there's an ego play involved, is that when brands get to a certain size, they see themselves as really global, which they are, and they want to really compete against the best of the best. So I do think that on average, there is a lot of money that's spent in F1 that is pure ego. Does it help with reaching a global audience? Can they calculate what the ROI is based on all of the signage at a specific track, what's being seen on social, what's being seen on linear TV, as an example with Heineken or with Rolex or with crypto.com? I would have a hard time believing that they could calculate down to the penny an ROI. But I think what they're seeing overall is what is their brand lift? What is the number of customers that they're able to get at one point in time in comparison to another point in time? Now, that kind of attribution model is a little bit loose because obviously they've got a lot of other things that they're doing as far as advertising is concerned. But I would say first and foremost is that if you don't have data capture involved, it's going to be difficult to really drive a true ROI. And so the teams that are able to combine not just the brand awareness, but some type of data capture through the promotions that they're doing, let's say through social or regularly online, are they able to pull data, as an example, mobile numbers, email addresses, with obviously all the rules and regulations being followed appropriately, and then be able to measure a little bit further than that? I think that that's difficult. The other piece of the equation is a hospitality aspect. When you're at this level and you're spending millions and millions and millions of dollars per year per sponsor, right, for this brand integration, you're typically getting some type of hospitality out of this as well. And when you're a global brand like a Louis Vuitton or others, there is a definite return based on who are you bringing to this race. So as an example, we were talking about Monaco. I mean, this is mega as far as everything from, of course, racing, but also fashion and celebrity. You know, we're talking about Monte Carlo. It's at a whole other level. And so what you could do to build around hospitality and events that are part of the main event of F1 and attribute your brand and focus your brand on that, there is value. There's value there. But I would say if you're looking and you're a marketer and you say, geez, it'd be great if we could sponsor a team, a driver, F1 overall, and you're thinking about ROI, I think you've got a long road to be able to really identify and do a full attribution to say, this sponsorship is garnering X revenue over a particular period, unless you've got some really strong data capture.
So it's really like a longer play than just like trying to attribute everything to the sponsorship.
Yeah, and I mean, you're getting so much reach. So we haven't even talked about Drive to Survive, right? The Netflix series that most people feel is really one of the strong reasons that F1 was able to build so much in the U.S. market so quickly in the last few years was based on that series, Drive to Survive, or as people call it, DTS, on Netflix. And then you've got the exposure there as far as all the brands are concerned. So it's interesting. Another little kind of tidbit trivia information. When Drive to Survive was in its first season, any fan was like, yes, finally, we've got this. And we can see the inside track and what's going on. And it's always stayed true to form. It's raw to a certain point. Obviously, there's editing that's going on. But when it started, the major players did not want to be involved, which is interesting and kind of parallels other industries. Ferrari,
of course,
and at the time, Mercedes, kind of like, we'll see how this kind of plays out. And what they saw, and rightfully so, is they saw other teams that were kind of mid-level or lower level getting so much visibility on Drive to Survive that they're like, why are we not here, right? We've got to be on here just to keep our brand alive, which is really unheard of, to be able to see a series, be able to drive that amount of leverage and control over brands like a Ferrari, brands like a Mercedes and F1.
Amazing. Why do you think that? Why do you think that those brands are they just like stodgy? Is it just like old school? Is it just where people just don't want to ever let anyone in?
Sometimes the approach to their brand is perhaps overly protective. And, on the one hand, you could think, okay, well, that's smart. They're such a global brand.
Sure.
They don't need to have the visibility of some of the teams that are, lower on the pole. But I also think that there's a certain amount of stodginess to it. There's a certain amount of, we are Ferrari, right? We are Mercedes. We don't need to get involved in this little, show, which, you can see as a mistake. Now they quickly have made ground, and it's few and far between that I think we'd even remember that they really weren't a part of it in the first season. But you do see that as kind of brands universal, right? Sometimes they're a little bit slower to move. The bigger they get, the bigger the ego they get, it makes them a little slower to move. The other thing is that when you see brands like Red Bull, which is obviously not an automotive company, being able to stand out so much in Formula One as a brand, and they've done that purposely, and they have 2 teams in Formula One, that brings a whole other dimension where other brands that are a little bit more stodgy, a little bit more slow to move, really have to take notice and figure things out. And that's what a lot of teams have done. But that, I think, is due in large part to what Red Bull has been able to do over the past decades that they've been involved in Formula One. And they've produced so many champions and championships for them as a manufacturer and as a team as well.
Can we get into sort of like the anatomy of a deal? By the way, fun fact, I interviewed the CMO at Oracle about investing in F1, about that $100 million deal a while back. And I think he's a Salesforce now, and a lot of the stuff that you just mentioned or previously mentioned about looking at brand investments like that are, things that he talked about. So I think I've always said marketing is inherently about waste, right? It's like if you're optimizing to 100%, that's actually mean you're doing a bad job, because you inherently have to waste in order to maximize the chances of reach.
What I would say there is I would just change that a little bit for my fellow marketers. And I say, you have to test. So sure. There's going to be periods of time where you're going to do something new and you can't be afraid to fail. And so you've got to do testing. And when you're finding out something that's working, then you need to double down and you need to take the risks. To your point, you need to take those risks and move forward with them. Things that aren't working, don't marry yourself to them. Figure out what you need to tweak and then continue to test. But to your point, marketing is not an exact science. It's few and far between, right, that are. And so you got to be able to test, you got to be able to take the risks to kind of figure it out. And going to your point about Oracle and Red Bull, I think that's one of the better sponsorships and brand integrations. I really have to think of this in brand integration space as opposed to sponsor, because sometimes when I think of sponsors, it's like, oh, we have our logo here, we have our logo there. And really, any company that can afford it can get a logo. But when you're doing a true brand integration, like Oracle has done with Red Bull, that's really where things can pay off. And so I actually do salute them for that, because they're not only involved from a visibility perspective and hospitality, they're on the car, they're also involved in the strategy. They're also involved in the technology. They're so tied in with that team. It really is a true partnership, even beyond your strong brand integrations. And so when a team like Red Bull is utilizing Oracle technology and they're utilizing the minds at Oracle to assist them on strategy, that is next level. It's unbelievable. And they've done a great job.
Let's dig into like the anatomy of a deal here. What goes into this and the negotiation and what brands are looking for and how they track? Like, how does this all happen?
Sure. And it definitely happens differently for different teams, because the teams and F1 have different approaches. And even when it comes down to the races, it can have different approaches. So what I know about the Las Vegas race, for instance, which has now been going on 2 years, I actually attended both races. A pretty interesting race we could potentially get into a little bit later. But there is an entity that oversees the Las Vegas F1 race that is related in some way, shape, or form to F1, right? But then it's not directly connected to any of the teams, but they all kind of work as you see them on screen together. But if you're looking to do a deal, you may have to work with 3 individual parties involved, or potentially even more if you were looking to work a deal with an individual driver as well. So you kind of think of it, it would take Las Vegas as an example. So you've got this Las Vegas entity, you've got F1, and then you've got the team. So let's say it was Red Bull, and then you've got an individual driver. Let's say it's Verstappen. Right. So now you're trying to figure out how this is all working. You know, you want to be in the mix. And so from the anatomy side, it's also directional. Is a team approaching a brand looking to identify the right brand to become, quote unquote, a sponsor and integrate their brand in? Or is it the brand that's reaching out to the team, or reaching out to F1, or reaching out to an individual race? The reason that's important is because it can change the mix, it can change the deal. Just like anything, if you have an entity coming to you, there's a certain amount of leverage that you have, to begin with. They're in need of sponsor dollars. All of them are, right? It's just kind of a feast or famine type of thing. So as a brand, one of the things you're trying to look at is, okay, what is the problem we as a brand are trying to solve? And how is investing in Formula One, investing in a team, investing in a driver, how is that going to help us, right? Is it purely an awareness play? Are we looking to do more integration and have them utilize our technology? Mm-hmm. Are we a beverage company like a beer where we're going to be available, across every single race, like Heineken? Not my favorite beer, sorry, but they do an incredible job of domination in F1 and many other verticals because they literally just buy everything out. There are some races you go to. I mentioned Montreal, which is a great race. And, on the track, and it's an amazing track, very walkable, Heineken has I would consider like a park. It's so big, right? It's like Heineken World, right? And they paid a massive amount of money for it. And they're seen everywhere. And the only beer that you can buy when you're there, and I don't mean in the Heineken area, I mean anywhere that I've seen, is Heineken. It's so large in terms of the sponsorship and what they're able to do with the dollars. That makes a difference. And so if you're Heineken and you're looking at something like this, you're looking at, I need to be the primary or the exclusive beer that is available anywhere. And that comes with a price. And so you're not only looking at it from, okay, where are you leveraging the awareness? Where are you leveraging the usage of the product? But then what does our hospitality look like? What does our access to the drivers look like? What is our access for our executives or for our partners? Because they have, big time global level partners that are, distributors and alike that are, working and spending a massive amount of money, and they all want to be a part of Formula One. So they have to look at this as an asset list and say, okay, here's all of the assets. Which one are we going to be able to attribute some type of ROI to? And which ones are we doing from, let's say an entertainment perspective? And where are those budgets coming from? And then how does that compete against other brand integrations that we're doing at this level? and then be able to decide, does it make sense, in terms of the spend?
What are the spend levels? So like, what's like the low end versus high? Obviously high end's $100 million. I feel like dip your toe marketing for this type of thing probably is a bit riskier even than the big bets. I mean, that's usually how it is with event sponsorship, right? Yeah. It's like, being one of the 30 people that are the featured sponsor versus being the platinum one, can potentially mean a lower ROI. But again, I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah. It's a great question. And you used an excellent term or phrase, right? Dipping your toe. If I was a marketer for a brand and we were talking about F1, unless we had 10 million plus, I wouldn't even touch it, because you're not going to get any visibility, because we just talked about the brands that are there and they're spending 20, 30, 50, 70 plus million a year on sponsorships like this with F1. And they maybe have sponsorships, not just with F1 in totality, but then individual races and then individual teams and then individual drivers. So the level of budget that you have to even make some type of impact, if you're looking at it from an awareness perspective, then driving down the funnel, you need to have a really large scale budget to do that. If you're just looking for hospitality, that can be a different story, right? You want to fly out, your top sales teams, your top distributors, your top partners to Austin, and you want them to have a great time in a hospitality suite, access to the paddock, maybe go to a driver's meeting or something like that. The spend's going to be significantly less, and maybe you can drive a little bit more of an ROI. But if you're looking at top of funnel, you need to be at just a multi-million-dollar level. I wouldn't consider dipping a toe. I'd look at other ways that you could spend that money a little bit more effectively and also be able to drive an ROI. But for things like events and hospitality and entertainment, there are definitely opportunities for brands to really be able to leverage F1 and leverage the teams and all the excitement that go along with it that can really make an impact.
Yeah, amazing. How does this compare to other sports?
Yeah, F1 is now on a level, it's kind of NFL, Premier League, F1. Premier League and F1, I would say, are probably even more comparable than NFL, because NFL is so US dominated within the US market. Exactly. And obviously they've gone beyond that and there's popularity in other countries. But I would say it's probably F1 and Premier League that are really competing as far as the largest scale budgets as far as sports is concerned. And, F1 has come up so rapidly in the last several years. And nowadays, I believe it's over 50% of the new sponsors in F1 are US-based companies. And typically they're US-based and have some type of international component to it. But that is almost a complete 180-degree turn from what it looked like, let's say, even 10 years ago, where the majority of companies were based out of Europe that were investing in Formula One. Now it is really flipped, and it's now US that's spending the big money.
Yeah, the sort of the rise of F1 to American audience is like pretty fascinating. But again, it's like, it's one of these things where it's drama, it's emotional drama. There's all sorts of, we've talked about it before on the show, about it. So fans are very dug in. It's very visually stimulating. You have all these like cool locales, which is like really cool. So it's very much a destination. I had a friend who just went to Tour de France for the first time, and my sister also went to Tour de France a couple of years ago. And going to the event and it being such an event was like the thing. They're both, big Tour de France fans, but going to the events was part of it. Whereas I think that a lot of people going to an F1 event is sort of like a life-changing proposition, of like, oh, I didn't know that sort of something could be this cool, and you're going to a different country potentially and all this different stuff. And so just the visual appeal and the destination aspect and sort of the sexiness and the storylines and all that sort of stuff, I think all, and cars go fast, it's like all of that stuff.
Make a lot of noise.
Yeah, make a lot of noise. So I think all that stuff, it's like, it's like obvious in retrospect, right? So like you could just be, your brand association, I think, would be clear there. But again, telling a bigger story other than just slapping your logo on it is always part of the problem with this sort of thing, right?
It is. And if you're not planning ahead for that, again, you can miss a lot of opportunities. It's really the same in any brand integration, that you're doing. You're starting off with, okay, what are the assets that the partner that you're partnering with, if it's F1 or it's a team or it's NFL or it's an NFL team, what are they offering? And then asking a lot of questions, be able to figure out, because you may not be an expert in that area, and they may be kind of laying out the standard package, which I see a lot of. It is amazing to see some pretty sophisticated, what you see on the outside as pretty sophisticated teams and venues and leagues and what they're packaging up for you. It's kind of a range between very cookie cutter and something very customized. And there is not necessarily consistency based on NFL teams or race teams. It really is almost to a certain degree, each one kind of individually kind of working out what it is they're going to offer. But the first thing they need to do, and I think this is a miss on the part of some teams, whatever league that they're in, whatever sport they're in, is they really need to ask questions of the marketing team. They need to understand what is the problem, right, that the brand is trying to solve. Is it awareness? Is it individual sales on whatever their product is? They need to understand that and then come back with something that says, hey, you know what? We got you. This is what we're thinking we're going to do. And we want to collaborate with you. And then it's the marketer's job to say, okay, does this work for us? Looking at a lot of different elements, right? Budget, reach, and then also determine how can we tie this into an evergreen campaign? So you have one F1 race. Maybe you decided, yes, I want to sponsor an F1 race. If you look at it as a marketer as just one F1 race, most of the teams are going to be fine with that. So some teams will say, you know what, let's figure out how we can work this to be bigger than just one race. You may be providing sponsorship, brand integration dollars for one race, but we're going to work with you so we could create an evergreen campaign for you that's year round. And you can do that with a sport like F1. You could do that with a sport like NFL football. The list goes on, but you have to have the experience on the marketing side and the partner on the team side, league side, venue, et cetera, to be able to actually make that work.
Cool. I love that. Do you have any other examples of some like your favorite sort of investments and sponsorships?
Yeah, I've got an interesting one. This may be a little bit surprising, but it really has to do with Gen Alpha and teenage girls, which you wouldn't think on the surface is going to go hand in hand with F1. But it's something that I think was pretty brave and pretty forward-looking to do. And that is with PacSun. So PacSun, used to be Pacific Sunwear, PacSun, action sports and teenage clothing and fashion and all of that. They did a really good job and have continued to do so, where they decided that they were going to team up, and I don't know all the details, but essentially work on some kind of licensing with F1 so that they could take the name of F1, right? The brand, the logos, imagery, et cetera, and attach it to their clothing. Now, my understanding in terms of their ideal customer is it looks like teenage girls, maybe 10 to 20, somewhere around there, right? Could be off a little bit. But you would think, okay, well, what interest does teenage girls have in Formula One, right? It's racing, it's cars, they're not necessarily interested in that. But what you actually find, and based on the brand integration that PacSun has done, is they really thought about it. And they thought, okay, we have teenage girls. We have these exotic destinations. We have apparel and a whole clothing line. And then we have pretty much young male racers. So we can see that there's some type of appeal there. And what they've been able to create with the help of their agreements with F1 is an interest in F1 from this demographic. And I know it because my daughter's in this demographic. And it's a new demographic that I haven't really seen before in F1, because before F1 years ago was predominantly male, predominantly middle-aged, and that was basically it. Now you've seen this whole kind of movement much more towards the side of having more of a balance between a demographic between male and female, and then much wider age ranges. I think the average age of an F1 fan has probably decreased at least probably 10 years or more just in the last several years based on a lot of the brand deals that they've done and the type of appeal that they've been able to create. They've been able to create a storyline, right? I mean, these are unbelievably gifted racers who live in exotic locations like Monaco and other places around the world. And they drive race cars that are incredibly sexy and driving them over 200 miles an hour. And they're usually between the ages of about 18 and 30, typically good-looking kids. That's going to have appeal to that demographic.
That's amazing. And I think that marketing to those demographics is pretty darn hard unless you're on TikTok, right?
Yeah. And they're on TikTok, of course, right? They're on TikTok, they're on IG, they're on everywhere that they need to be, but they've created an interest from a demographic, from my viewpoint, kind of that came out of nowhere. And it wasn't something that was expected. Now, what F1 needs to do in return is more of what they've started recently. So they have an F1 Academy and they have female drivers and they're starting to build that driver network, but they need to do more of that. I mean, I don't see any reason why there can't be a female F1 driver next season and then building on from there. It is a sport that is a little bit different than other sports in the sense that you're in a race car, you're as good as the race car and you're as good as your driver is. And you see it in other, whether it's IndyCar or you see it in other race series. I think you need to see it more in Formula One, which would be a better reflection of who their fan base is now and also who they want their fan base to be in the future.
What do people get wrong about this sort of, I mean, I think that it's sort of like, if you don't come in with $10 million, then it's might not be worth it thing. It's pretty important. Like, what do people get wrong?
I think that when you're looking at it as kind of like a one-shot wonder in terms of, okay, you've got to spend, maybe the CEO is excited about being a part of Formula One, and so you invested in Formula One, but you did plan it. So that's probably the biggest piece is it's kind of, you get it wrong if you don't plan and you haven't figured out, okay, what are we going after? What's the problem we're looking to solve based on this sponsorship, this brand integration? What is our approach going to be? And how are we going to track it, right? You have to start that way before. You can't start that when you're already in the mix. You've already signed on the dotted line and then figure it out, because you need your partner's help with this as well, because they have data and you need to figure out what type of data they have and how does that work with the data that you need. And again, all the rules and regulations to be able to make sure that that's going to work for you. So number one thing is making sure that you are planning and that your plan aligns with your business strategy and you have a way to track your performance.
And what about, like, you mentioned a little bit about the ROI piece. You mentioned a little bit about sort of like having a plan when you go in of like what you're looking for. How does sort of like licensing work with, like, how much can you take this outside of just the existing F1, day of the race type stuff?
Yeah, I think that's really where the creativity comes in, is really being able to determine, based on the assets you have, how can you use them? And this goes along with any sport. So, in the example I was using with PacSun, right, they've done a good job in that I don't, as a viewer of F1 watching a race, I don't really see PacSun. Where I see PacSun is where they think they can utilize the brand the most, right? Which is through social media, in the stores, right? Online. That's where they're leveraging the brand that I see most as a viewer, as opposed to, Rolex, which I see tremendous amount of signage for, right? And integrations on site at the track, or a crypto.com, or a Heineken, or a Louis Vuitton. It's a different type of play. I think it's a smarter play, because it's really looking at how do you move the needle in terms of being able to sell apparel, right? That's directly related to the sport that we're investing in. One of the things that is always interesting to think about, even from, let's say, a team side, a league, venue, et cetera, is how does their brand align with your brand? And what is intriguing is oftentimes you hear from teams is, we really take a very specific approach because we want to make sure that the brands that we have as partners, as sponsors, and we're doing integrations with, align with our values, right? Align with what we want to do. What is sometimes humorous about that is to see some of the brands that are associated with teams and leagues and venues and to think, did they ask that question? Not so much on the brand side, but on, let's say team side. So of course, one of the classic ones in F1 that comes to mind is FTX, right? So FTX went belly up. It was fraud. A lot of people invested a lot of money into that. But the question is, did F1 take a serious enough look at who was behind that brand? What were they doing? What was actually real versus just kind of vaporware? And, of course, hindsight is 2020. I'm using that as an example to say that there needs to be much more of that, because you can also piss off large brands if those brands are seeing you as a team, league, venue, et cetera, associated with brands that don't work for them, right? And so it's it's a two-way street for sure. FTX is just one of those examples.
Yeah. What else on F1?
So another piece with F1, and we talked about the storyline that's been created in such a amazing way with Drive to Survive series, is that you see that there are storylines that can really be brought out, and they're very interesting. It's not just people driving cars and helmets and you can't see who they are, right? They've been able to bring the drivers and the teams, the entire teams, out of kind of the background and, into the foreground. And that's something that brands can really leverage as well, is to figure out what the storyline is, right? To get the human aspect to it. And I think that is a great opportunity for brands to look at, is that if they're going to invest in a driver or they're going to invest in a team, is, what personalities are making up that team? There is, no matter what, it's rare that you're going to see an entire set, an entire race team, or an entire series like F1 with every single race driver being great in front of the camera, being great from a media standpoint. It takes a lot of time, and you have some of the top racers who are still not great. But sometimes you can look at, let's say, someone who's more mid-level, the team or the individual driver, or someone maybe a little bit closer to the bottom, but they have a lot more personality as a team. They're willing to take a little bit more risks as a team, as a driver, to help tell the story and be able to help integrate the brand along with themselves, in the team. And I think that's a great opportunity where you can look at it as a brand and say, hey, we don't have to spend the money to be part of, and I'm just using this as an example, Red Bull or Ferrari or Mercedes, but we can look potentially at a different team, or we could potentially look even at a different league, like an F2 or an F3, and be able to create a storyline, or F1 Academy, and create a storyline around drivers that are interesting, have interesting backgrounds, have done the work to be able to be media trained, are good on camera, have a sense of humor, and people find them interesting, because then you can leverage it very easily for platforms like social media. And that is really where you can drive a lot of awareness, is being able to team up with individuals as well as entire teams who have a personality that aligns with your brand and that can help you stand out from the crowd.
Yeah. It's so cool to be able to leverage sort of like the premium storylines of like Drive to Survive and things like that as part of this, right? Because it just gives you another layer into this whole thing. What about like, I mean, this is silly, but like alienating a percentage of fans that aren't a fan of that driver or that team or whatever? I'm just more thinking of like, as a brand, it's cool that you can sort of draft off of that, right? If you're a sponsor. But I was also thinking, I'm like, is there any downside to that?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point in terms of the association that you have from a brand and a driver, or a brand and a team. You have to be aware of that, because there definitely could be things that could kind of blow up in your face. What I believe is that for those that are very intense F1 fans, or even kind of casual F1 fans, they're going to be aware of the brands who do the best as far as integration is concerned. If they don't like a particular driver, so for instance, let's say you did particularly like Max, is that going to dissuade you from drinking Red Bull? I don't think so. I think Red Bull goes beyond even Max. I think what what inherently it does is look at it from the standpoint if you're associated with Max, you're associated with a winner. And a lot of brands want to be associated with the winner, right? Sometimes you can create storylines about challenger brands or individual racers who are kind of challenging those winners. But I think that's part of it. And then obviously, if you're a winning team or you're a winning driver, you can drive a lot higher numbers as far as partnership dollars. And that makes a difference as well.
Yeah, that's great. Ondar, this has been just absolutely awesome chatting F1 sponsorships with you. Before we get out of here, I do want to know, what's your best piece of advice for a CMO or head of marketing trying to figure out their content strategy?
Plan, and then data, and data. So first off, the plan, right, is you have to make sure you're aware of what the strategy is of the company that you're with. And if you're a CMO, you're obviously responsible for the marketing strategy, and you should have a seat at the table as part of the developing the strategy as far as the company in whole. So that's first off. And then understanding exactly what the challenge is, and then how are you going to be able to come up with a solution based on the decisions that you're making based on brand integration. And then from there is what data can you capture and how can you utilize that data so that you can drive metrics and those reporting metrics to show exactly what the benefit is, the partnership is that you're involved with. And those elements are really key. And from there is to figure out how you can sustain and scale it. So if something's working, then how do you double down on that? Have you already aligned with the finance side of the equation? Have you already been working with your CFO? Have you already been working with, your CEO to really understand exactly, how are they approaching this so that you're not doing it in isolation, even if you have the budget? You want to make sure that you're aligned across the board.
Amazing. Ondar, wonderful chatting with you. Any final thoughts? Anything to plug?
This has been wonderful. I really appreciate it, Ian and Meredith. It's been a great show. And again, one of my favorite topics to talk about. You can find me on LinkedIn is probably the best way to find me. And I've got some great posts recently of some amazing brand integrations with 00 Nation, as well as Fastlane Drive, who I'm associated with and doing consulting for currently. And I can always available as far as consulting work across the board. So small campaigns, large campaigns, working from a brand integration standpoint with sports teams, as well as more traditional marketing. So I just enjoyed being on the show and I really appreciate the time.
Love it. Awesome. Thanks, Ondar. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for today. I hope you got some good ideas for your B2B content. Thank you for listening to Remarkable. I'm Ian Faison, CEO of Caspian Studios. Remarkable is created by the team at Caspian Studios, B2B podcast as a service. Caspian also creates fiction series for B2B companies, so if you want a business thriller, you can learn more at caspianstudios.com. Hollywood-style storytelling for B2B. And in today's episode, you heard from myself, Ian Faison, and Meredith O'Neill, senior producer here at Caspian Studios. Remarkable was produced this week by Meredith O'Neill, mixed by Scott Goodrich, and our theme song is Solomon by Falak. Be remarkable and rise above the noise.